She came from the snow, barely standing. A Labrador mother, soaked and shaking, with two tiny pups pressed against her ribs. She didn't bark. She didn't beg. She simply looked at the man through the glass like she had nowhere else left to go. And what he saw in her eyes would change everything. Whispers through the pines. The blizzard had swallowed Hope Hollow whole, draping the pines in white silence. Inside a weathered cabin at the edge of the woods, Ben Whitaker sat by the fire railing, as always. But on that night, loneliness would open its door, and a broken soul, covered in frost and scars, would walk in. Wind howled through the pines of Hope Hollow like a mourning ghost, lashing against the sides of the worn log cabins that dotted the frozen hills. Snow came down in sheets, thick and blinding, erasing the landscape in swirls of white. It was the kind of storm that closed roads, cut off power, and hushed even the boldest creatures into silence. Nestled among those silent woods stood a cabin at the end of a gravel path long since buried under snow. Inside, the fireplace crackled weakly, the flames casting warm amber shadows against the walls as Ben Whitaker sat in a chair older than most of his memories. Ben, a man in his early 60s, carried the kind of presence that silence favored. His hair, once coal-black, had thinned and silvered, worn like the scars on his hands and the lines around his eyes. A retired Army field medic, Ben had seen the worst men could do to each other, and the weight of it had never truly left his shoulders. He walked with a slight limp souvenir from a mission gone wrong in Kandahar and preferred solitude to conversation. His days in Hope Hollow were quiet, filled with books, firewood, and memories of his late wife Marlene, whose laughter had once filled this house like sunlight. Since she passed 3 winters ago, the cabin had felt colder, despite the fire always burning. Outside, the blizzard screamed. The old wind chimes hanging on the porch clinked in protest, sharp and discordant. Ben glanced at the window but saw only a curtain of snow. He reached for his mug of lukewarm coffee, but paused. There, that sound again. A scratching. Faint, almost tentative then again. Louder. Not the branches. Not the wind. Something deliberate. Ben set his mug down and rose, his movements deliberate, cautious. He pulled on his heavy coat, military issue, patched at the elbow. His boots, old leather laced with the salt of previous winters, echoed on the wooden floor as he stepped toward the door. His hand hovered over the brass handle. The scratching came again, followed by a whimper fragile and broken, as if hope itself had learned to whisper. Ben opened the door. The cold punched him in the chest. Snow swirled in like smoke from a cannon. But what stopped his breath wasn't the storm, it was what stood just beyond the threshold. A Labrador retriever. She was hunched low, ribs visible under a coat once golden but now matted with ice and dirt. Her body shook violently, more from exhaustion than fear, but it was her eyes that stopped Ben. Deep, amber, pleading eyes that didn't beg for help, but offered it. Pressed tightly against her were 2 puppies, barely old enough to stand. Their fur was clumped with snow, their limbs trembling with the cruel bite of the cold. And yet, even as the wind whipped around her, the mother stood unmoving, shielding her children with her body like a living barrier between life and death. Ben dropped to one knee, ignoring the burn of snow against his skin. "Hey there," he said, his voice a soft rasp. "Easy, girl. You made it this far. Let me help now." The dog didn't move. She stared at him, calculating, uncertain. One of the pups let out a faint cry. The mother glanced down, nuzzled it gently, then looked back at Ben. He reached out slowly, open palm extended. "Come on, girl. Let me get you out of this." Stillness. Then, she stepped forward. One slow, reluctant movement, then another. She nudged her pups forward, though one stumbled and collapsed. Instinctively, She picked the smaller one up by the scruff of its neck, her jaw trembling from the cold, and took a final step over the threshold. Ben guided them inside and shut the door. The wind howled against the frame like it had lost something. Inside, the warmth hit the dog like a wave. Her legs buckled slightly, but she remained upright. Ben quickly cleared a space near the fire, laying down an old quilt. He helped her lower the pups onto it and then draped a blanket over all three. The mother flinched at the contact, letting out a low growl, not aggressive, just wary. "All right," Ben murmured, raising his hands. Message received. He stood and fetched a shallow bowl, filled it with warm water, and placed it near her. Then, he opened a can of chicken stew he had and scooped out the contents onto a plate. The dog watched him the entire time, muscles taut, eyes never leaving his hands. She eventually leaned forward, tongue flicking out toward the water. Her pups huddled close to her warmth, two tiny bodies seeking comfort in a world that had offered none. The larger one had a faint white stripe down its nose. The smaller, barely more than a bundle of fur, wheezed softly with each breath. Ben sat back in his chair, silent. He didn't know where she'd come from or how long she'd been out there, but the fact that she had made it through this storm with two newborns no less was nothing short of miraculous. "You've got fight in you," he whispered, watching the Labrador curl protectively around her pups. "Guess that makes two of us." Outside, the blizzard raged on, indifferent. But inside, in a quiet cabin buried in snow, 3 lives had just begun again. The wind had quieted by morning, leaving behind a hushed world smothered in thick layers of snow, every tree and rooftop glazed in frost. Sunlight fought to pierce the stubborn clouds, casting a dim gray light over Hope Hollow. Inside Ben's cabin, the atmosphere was still, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional whimper of the 2 puppies as they shifted under the patchwork quilt. Ben crouched near the hearth, stirring the embers back to life with slow, practiced movements. He had stacked extra wood beside the fire the night before, but he could already feel the chill gnawing at the edges of the room. He glanced over his shoulder. Maggie, the battered Labrador retriever, lay curled tightly around her pups. Her body was rigid, her head lifted just slightly from the floor, golden brown eyes tracking every move Ben made. He kept his actions deliberate, slow. He knew enough from the battlefield and later from shelter work with Marlene that wounded souls, whether human or animal, needed patience more than pity. His voice stayed low as he murmured, "Easy, girl. No one's gonna hurt you here." Maggie's fur had begun to dry, revealing more of the injuries she carried like hidden stories written across her body. Thin scars laced her belly and haunches, some old and pale, others fresher, pink against the pale yellow of her coat. Her nose twitched, testing the air, catching the scent of smoke, pine, and something new chicken. Ben stood and moved to the kitchen, a modest space with pine cabinets scarred from years of hard use. He pulled a dented pot from the shelf, filled it with a can of chicken broth and some shredded meat he'd saved for emergencies. As the stew simmered, the cabin filled with a rich, savory aroma that made his own stomach grumble. When he returned to the living room, he carried 2 bowls sewn with warm broth, the other with softened kibble from an old bag he hadn't had the heart to throw away. He placed them near Maggie, careful to stay low, his posture non-threatening. Maggie growled low in her throat, a warning, not a threat. Her hackles raised slightly, but she didn't lunge or snap. She simply watched. Ben backed off, sitting cross-legged a good 5 feet away. "It's yours," he said, nodding toward the food. "For you and the little ones." Minutes passed. The fire popped and sighed, filling the silence. One of the pups, a chubby ball of tan fur with floppy ears and a pink nose, gave a tiny tentative yip. Maggie turned, nosed him gently, and finally, cautiously, lowered her head to the bowls. She drank first, laps of water splashing against the metal. Then, after another long pause, she ate, slowly, carefully, as if expecting it to be snatched away at any second. Ben exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Trust wasn't given freely, it was earned in slivers, and this was the first. While Maggie ate, Ben carefully inspected the pups from a distance. They were small, probably only a few weeks old. Their eyes were open, though bleary, and their movements still clumsy. One had a patch of darker fur over one eye, like a pirate's mark, while the other was paler, with oversized paws that suggested he'd grow into a big dog one day. The phone rang, shattering the fragile peace. Maggie jumped, teeth bared in a silent snarl, her body tensing protectively over the pups. Ben raised his hand, soothing. "It's okay, girl. Stay put." He crossed the room to the landline mounted on the wall, one of the few concessions to modernity he allowed himself. The caller ID flashed. Dana Collins. Ben picked up. "Morning, Dana." On the other end, Sheriff Dana Collins' voice was clipped, but concerned. "Morning, Ben. Sorry to bother you in this mess. I'm doing a welfare check on everyone out your way." Dana had been Hope Hollow's sheriff for almost a decade, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, with a reputation for kindness underpinned by steel. She was of average height, with a wiry build honed by years of chasing troublemakers through backwoods and logging camps. Her sandy blonde hair was usually pulled into a tight ponytail, and her blue eyes missed nothing. After losing her younger brother to an overdose years ago, Dana had become fiercely protective of the vulnerable, something that earned her equal parts respect and wariness around town. "I'm fine," Ben said, glancing at Maggie. "Got company, though." Dana hesitated. "Listen, Ben, while I've got you, something serious has come up. A little girl's gone missing. Emma Reynolds, 8 years old. Last seen yesterday afternoon, near the old logging trail by Carter's Creek." Ben frowned, his grip tightening on the receiver. Carter's Creek wasn't far. "You thinking she's just lost?" "I wish," Dana said grimly. "We found signs of a struggle. Torn fabric, footprints, maybe an animal, maybe worse. We're treating it like an abduction for now." Ben's heart sank. He remembered Emma, bright little thing with wild red curls and a laugh like bells. She was the daughter of Lindsay Reynolds, a schoolteacher at Hope Hollow Elementary, a kind woman who had once brought homemade pies to Marlene during her last months. The thought of Lindsay's heartbreak made Ben's gut twist. "You need help with the search?" he asked. "Not yet. Roads are still a mess, and we've got SAR teams coming from Salem. I just wanted folks out your way to stay alert. If you see or hear anything strange, you call me Ben." "Promise?" "Promise," Ben said quietly. After hanging up, he returned to the living room. Maggie had finished eating but remained wary, her ears flicking toward every sound. She met his gaze for a long moment, and in her eyes, Ben saw more than fear. He saw a battered resilience, the same look he'd seen in soldiers too stubborn to die. "You've been through hell," Ben said softly, "but you're safe now." Outside, the storm had eased, but the woods still whispered with unseen dangers. Inside, the fire crackled louder, pushing back the cold and the dark, and for the first time in a long while, the little cabin on the edge of Hope Hollow felt less empty. Morning arrived sluggishly in Hope Hollow, the pale sun struggling to burn through the heavy mist that clung to the pines like a second skin. The cabin creaked as it settled under the weight of the snow that had fallen through the night, and the air outside still carried the sharp sting of frost. Inside, the fire had burned low but stubbornly refused to die out, filling the room with a muted orange glow. Ben Whitaker stirred from his chair by the hearth, stiff from a night spent half sleeping, always with one ear tuned to the slightest sound. Maggie lay curled around her 2 pups, her breathing deep but cautious, one eye cracked open, watching him. The pups stirred occasionally, mewling softly as they nestled against their mother's belly. Ben stretched, the muscles in his back protesting, and crossed to the window. He froze. There, in the fresh snow just beyond the porch, was a set of footprints. Ben's gut tightened. They weren't his, hadn't been outside since bringing Maggie and the pups in. He leaned closer, squinting against the glare of the snow. The prints were spaced unevenly, as if whoever had made them was either limping or staggering, and they led from the tree line toward the cabin, then stopped. No approach to the door, no retreat. A low growl rumbled behind him. Ben turned. Maggie was on her feet, body stiff, fur bristling along her spine. Her gaze was locked on the door, her teeth bared in a silent snarl. The puppies stirred, sensing their mother's agitation. Ben stepped slowly back from the window and moved toward the gun cabinet. He hadn't fired a weapon since leaving the army, hadn't wanted to, but some habits never died. He retrieved an old pump-action shotgun, checking it with methodical calm. "Easy, girl," he said softly, though his own nerves hummed like a taut wire. "We're not alone." Cautiously, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold slapped him in the face, stealing his breath. He scanned the trees, the silent world beyond the clearing. Nothing moved. No sound but the distant groaning of the forest as the wind shifted. He followed the tracks with his eyes. They ended at the edge of the porch, where the snow had been disturbed but not melted, suggesting the visitor hadn't lingered long. Kneeling, Ben brushed away a layer of snow, revealing something dark embedded in the drift. A torn strip of fabric. He picked it up carefully. It was part of a jacket sleeve, frayed and stained, with the faint scent of oil and something fowler-like rot. Ben's mind raced. Was this connected to the missing girl, or had someone been hunting Maggie? Either way, it meant danger too close for comfort. Behind him, Maggie whined low in her throat. Ben turned to see her standing at the doorway, refusing to leave the safety of her pups but unwilling to let him face whatever was out there alone. He tucked the strip of cloth into his jacket pocket and retreated inside, bolting the door behind him. Then, after stoking the fire, he picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff's office again. The line clicked, and a voice answered, not Dana, but a younger male voice, earnest and slightly rushed. "Hope, Hollow Sheriff's Office. Deputy Kyle speaking." Ben remembered Kyle Portera, lean, gangly kid barely out of the academy, with sandy hair, a sunburned nose, and a smile that hadn't yet been worn away by cynicism. Kyle had grown up in Hope Hollow, the son of a local mechanic and a school librarian, and had always been known for his earnestness and his clumsy, heartfelt desire to help. "Kyle, this is Ben Whitaker," he said. "I've got something you'll want to see." "Mr. Whitaker, sir." Sheriff Collins said to keep an ear out for anything unusual. "I think this counts," Ben said grimly. He explained about the footprints, the torn fabric. Kyle's voice sharpened. "I'll let Sheriff Collins know right away. She's out coordinating search teams, but I'll pass it on. Stay inside, sir. Lock your doors. We'll send someone by as soon as we can." Ben hung up and glanced at the front door, his hand lingering on the bolt. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, erasing tracks as fast as they were made. Whoever had been out there might be long gone or might be waiting just beyond the trees. Maggie had settled back by the fire but remained alert, her head raised, ears pricked at every sound. The pups slept, oblivious, their small bodies rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Ben sat back down in his chair, the shotgun resting across his lap. He wasn't about to let anything happen to them, not after what they'd been through. The memory of Maggie standing against the storm, shielding her babies with nothing but her own battered body, hardened his resolve. Minutes turned into an hour. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet cabin. Finally, a vehicle crunched up the driveway, tires struggling against the snow. Ben stood and peered through the window, relaxing slightly when he saw the Hope Hollow Sheriff's SUV. Kyle Porter emerged, bundled in a department-issued parka too big for his wiry frame. He stomped up the porch steps, cheeks red from the cold, his breath puffing out in white clouds. Ben opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Whitaker," Kyle said, his voice tight with concern. "Sheriff's tied up coordinating the search grid, but she wanted me to check this out." Ben nodded and handed over the scrap of fabric. Kyle turned it over in his gloved hands, frowning. "This could be important," Kyle said. "Sheriff Collins will want it logged. You said the tracks ended here." Ben pointed to the spot just beyond the porch. Kyle stepped carefully out, examining the snow with professional seriousness. "No sign of retreat," Kyle muttered. "They came up to the cabin and either doubled back exactly on their own steps, or they're still out there." Ben felt a chill deeper than the weather settle in his bones. Kyle straightened, his young face serious. "I'll report this in. In the meantime, sir, keep that shotgun handy. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Ben nodded grimly. Kyle left after a few more words of caution, his SUV disappearing down the snow-choked road. As Ben bolted the door once more, he noticed Maggie watching him intently. She didn't growl this time. She simply lay her head back down on her paws, her body relaxing but only slightly. They both knew it wasn't over. Someone had found the cabin, and they would likely come back. The snow had crusted overnight, forming a brittle shell over the land as if the forest had frozen mid-breath. The light filtering through the pine canopy was dull and gray, but inside Ben Whitaker's cabin, the fire still glowed gently. Maggie lay curled near it, her breathing light, the two puppies nestled against her belly. Though she had finally closed her eyes, her ears flicked at every creak of wood or distant rustle. She hadn't truly relaxed since Ben brought her in. Ben stood in the kitchen, pouring warm water into a battered thermos, eyes constantly drifting back to the trio near the hearth. He had barely slept. After discovering those strange footprints outside, Maggie's instincts had kicked into high alert, and her unspoken anxiety had infected him too. But today, he had something else to focus on. He needed answers, real ones. The dog had been through something, and it was time to find out what. By mid-morning, he had loaded Maggie and the pups into his truck with quiet efficiency. He used old towels and a soft-sided crate for the puppies, while Maggie sat in the back, her body tense but obedient. She trusted him now just enough. The drive to Willow Creek Veterinary was slow. The roads had thawed just enough to be treacherous, patches of mud and ice playing tricks on the tires. The clinic stood on the edge of town, tucked beside a cedar grove, a converted farmhouse with a sagging porch and a wooden sign that read, "Dr. Abigail Rowan, DVM." Dr. Rowan was in her late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a streak of white in her dark brown hair that she never bothered to dye. Her face was weathered, not from vanity but from decades spent in all weather, tending to animals that didn't know they were loved. She wore hiking boots, jeans, and a fleece-lined vest with the clinic's logo stitched near the collar. A scar curved just beneath her left wristern from rescuing a frightened shepherd from barbed wire when she was just 19. She greeted Ben with a nod as he stepped inside, holding the crate of pups while Maggie followed close behind. "You've got trouble or a miracle?" she asked. "Maybe both," Ben said. She led them to an exam room and knelt beside Maggie without hesitation, holding out her hand palm up. Maggie sniffed it, then gently nudged her head forward in reluctant acceptance. Dr. Rowan moved with quiet authority, guiding Maggie up onto the table with Ben's help. The Labrador's body trembled not with fear, but memory. She didn't growl, didn't resist. She simply stood there, silent and stiff. The first thing Abigail noticed was the weight. "She's malnourished, at least 20 pounds under," she murmured, running practiced hands along Maggie's ribs. "And this belly tells a story." Her fingers gently traced the line of Maggie's underside, pausing at a web of pale scars. She's been bred. Too often. Too young, maybe. Her teats are overused, and her joints feel like she's been on concrete for too long. Ben swallowed hard. See this? Abigail lifted one paw slightly. The fur was rubbed raw around the wrist. That's a chain mark. Probably spent most of her life tethered. And this here. She parted the fur behind Maggie's ear, revealing an old welt, now smooth with time. Shock collar, or worse. Ben felt a quiet anger rise in his chest. Dr. Rowan stepped back and let Maggie lie down on the blanket they'd placed on the table. She's gentle, she said, almost to herself. That's what kills me about dogs like this. They go through hell, and they still look at you like you might be different. She is different, Ben said. Rowan smiled, weary and sincere. Yeah, she is. She moved to the crate and examined the pups next, her touch feather-light. The smaller one, this girl here, is a bit dehydrated, but otherwise they're lucky. Good lungs, steady heartbeats. She kept them alive when most wouldn't have had the strength. She looked back at Ben. What are you planning to do with them? He hesitated. I haven't thought that far. Rowan raised an eyebrow. You've got blankets for them, heat, formula. Drove all the way out here after a storm. She set the pup back gently. Sounds like someone's already made a decision. Ben gave a soft chuckle but said nothing. In truth, the thought had been circling him like a hawk all morning. Before he left, Dr. Rowan handed him a small canvas bag filled with basic meds, antibiotics, supplements, dewormer, and 2 small bottles of puppy milk replacer. You've got something special there, Ben, she said as they stepped back onto the porch. I know a survivor when I see one, and I know the kind of man who doesn't walk away from something broken. Ben looked down at Maggie, who now stood beside him with soft, steady eyes. She's not broken, he said quietly. She's just waiting to feel safe. The woods around Hope Hollow didn't whisper that night they held their breath. The wind was still, the air brittle, and a light fog drifted low across the forest floor like ghosts searching for shape. From inside the cabin, Ben Whitaker stood by the window, watching the pines, his hand resting lightly on the curtain. Maggie lay at his feet, ears erect, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. It had been a quiet day, too quiet. Since the visit to Dr. Rowan, Maggie had seemed steadier, less tense. She had nuzzled her pups with a tenderness Ben couldn't stop thinking about. He had spent the afternoon building a better pen for them from old cedar panels behind the cabin, and when he finished, he found himself smiling more than he had in months. But that stillness had shifted at sundown. Maggie's mood changed. Her gaze sharpened. She paced by the door. And now she lay in alert silence, sensing something that Ben couldn't. The fire crackled behind him, casting soft light across the walls. The pups were asleep in a warm pile of fur and breath, their bellies full, their tiny legs twitching in dreams. Ben reached down and scratched behind Maggie's ear. You feel it too, huh, girl? She didn't look at him. Her focus remained on the woods. Then it happened. A flicker. Not movement, but the suggestion of it. Between the trees, just beyond the edge of visibility, a figure stood still. Human. Not a deer. Not a shadow. Someone was watching the cabin. Ben froze, then moved quickly and quietly to the rack by the fireplace, retrieving the old hunting rifle he hadn't used in years but always kept oiled. He returned to the window and squinted into the distance, but the figure had vanished. Maggie growled, not loud, but low and guttural, like something rising from her chest that she couldn't hold back. Ben bolted the front and back doors and checked the windows. Then he turned off the interior lights, letting the fire remain the only glow. He sat in his armchair, rifle across his lap, Maggie beside him. Together, they watched. Hours passed, the woods gave nothing more. But the question echoed loud in Ben's mind. Who was out there? And what were they looking for? End of prank. The next morning, the fog lingered, clinging to the trees like a second skin. Ben stepped outside after sunrise, Maggie at his heel, and scanned the perimeter. On a patch of damp earth just beyond the tree line, he saw them footprints. Deep, heavy, adult-sized, leading to the cabin and then veering back into the forest. He knelt beside them, studying the pattern. They weren't from any boot he owned. The heel print had a crack down the center, worn and old. Whoever it was had come close, too close. Back inside, Ben made coffee with shaking hands. The warmth steadied him only slightly. He picked up the old rotary phone mounted on the wall and dialed the sheriff's office. Hope Hollow Sheriff's Office, Collins speaking, came the familiar voice. "Dana, it's Ben," he said. Her tone shifted. "Everything all right?" "Not really. Someone was on my property last night, watching. Left tracks. I don't know who, but Maggie knew." There was a pause. "You still think it's tied to where she came from?" "I'm starting to think it's more than that," Ben said. "I think they're looking for her. Or maybe what she saw." Dana sighed. "We've got a missing girl, Ben. Emma Reynolds. And not much to go on. You think there's a connection?" "I don't know yet. But that dog didn't end up on my porch by accident. She ran from something. And whoever she ran from might not want her found." Dana was silent for a long beat. Then she said, "I'll send Deputy Rachel to sweep the area. Stay inside. Lock the place down." Ben hung up and turned toward Maggie. She stood by the fire again, watching him, as if waiting for his next move. "I think it's time we found out what they're so afraid of, girl," he murmured. End of prank. That afternoon, Deputy Rachel Morgan arrived. Tall and composed, Rachel had a quiet steadiness about her. Auburn hair tucked neatly under her patrol cap, a badge on her chest, and a notebook in her hand. She didn't speak much at first, just studied the tracks, took measurements, marked the tree line. She had once worked search and rescue in Montana before becoming a deputy. A calm head in chaos, she didn't spook easily. "They were here a while," she said, kneeling beside the tracks. "Too clean for a passing hiker. This was deliberate." Ben told her everything: the barking, the growl, the figure, the tracks. Rachel listened, then knelt beside Maggie, who sniffed her cautiously before settling near Ben again. "She's alert, not aggressive." "That's a good sign," Rachel said. "Means she's smart enough to know you're safe. But she still feels threatened." "What do you think they're after?" Rachel stood, brushing off her knees. "If she came from a puppy mill, there's a chance she saw something. Something someone wants buried. And if Emma somehow got too close to that, there's a motive." Ben's stomach turned. The thought of a missing child being tied to Maggie's past made the whole thing colder. That night, Ben sat on the floor beside the fire, Maggie's head resting against his thigh. Outside, the wind picked up again. But this time, it didn't sound like a storm. It sounded like someone walking through the trees, and they were getting closer. The snow had softened under the afternoon sun, leaving muddy veins through the forest trails that surrounded Ben Whitaker's cabin. Birds were beginning to return to the trees, their tentative songs piercing the cold air like flickers of hope. But inside the cabin, the air remained heavy with unspoken worry. Ben knelt near the hearth, coaxing the fire with a bundle of dry kindling. Maggie lay nearby, her body stretched protectively around her two pups, who were now toddling in lazy circles. The tension that had gripped her the previous night still lingered. Her eyes never left the front door, and she flinched at each creak of the walls. Ben watched her quietly, a steaming mug in one hand. He had come to understand her body language intimately in the past few days, when she was relaxed, when she was alert, when she was on edge. And today, she was something else, guarded but curious. She had taken one cautious step closer every day since their first meeting. Now, She no longer growled when he moved near the pups. It was time. Ben set the mug aside and lowered himself to the rug just a few feet from her. He didn't speak at first. He simply sat, waited. After a few minutes, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of dried venison from the jerky he had saved for special occasions. He set it on the floor between them and backed away slightly. Maggie's eyes flicked from the meat to him, then back again. She didn't move. "Your call," Ben murmured. 20 minutes passed before Maggie finally inched forward. She picked up the treat gently, without sound, and carried it back to her pups. It was a beginning. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dana Collins parked her cruiser at the edge of Ben's drive. She stepped out wearing her long brown coat, hair tied back, a weathered notebook tucked under one arm. Her boots crunched softly in the slush as she approached the cabin. Ben met her at the porch. "I've been working the case all day," she said without preamble. "You were right, this is just about a missing dog." They stepped inside, and Maggie immediately lifted her head, eyes locked on the newcomer. Dana didn't move too quickly. She had experience with animals. She offered a brief nod and crouched at a distance, giving Maggie space. "She's alert," Dana said, reading the dog like a deputy would read a suspect. "Good girl." Maggie didn't growl. She didn't relax either. Ben motioned for Dana to sit. "What did you find?" Dana opened her notebook. A few months back, a property near Fox Hollow about 15 miles north was flagged by animal control. Neighbors complained of barking, movement at night, strange trucks pulling in and out. When the officers arrived, the place was cleared out. No animals, no people, just cages. Rusted, some blood-stained. Not enough for a case. Ben felt a weight tighten in his chest. "Here's the thing," Dana continued. 2 weeks ago, a girl named Emma Reynolds disappeared from a trail near that same area. Search teams didn't find a trace. And now? A malnourished Labrador shows up on your porch with pups, scars from heavy breeding and confinement, and someone starts creeping around your property. She leaned forward. "This isn't random." Ben rubbed a hand over his face. "You think the people who ran that operation took the girl?" "I think whoever ran it is willing to silence anyone who might have seen something," Dana said. "Even a dog." Maggie stirred, ears twitching. Ben looked toward her. "She's trying to protect them. All of them." Dana nodded. "We've pulled property records. The place near Fox Hollow is tied to a shell company based out of Idaho. But the signature on the lease matches a man named Ray Harlan. He used to run a kennel out near the interstate. Shut down 5 years ago for violations on sanitary conditions. Suspected dogfighting. Charges dropped. No conviction." Ben frowned. "That name sounds familiar." Dana pulled a worn photo from her pocket. "Gray jacket, scar on his left cheek, carries a limp." Ben took the photo and held it up to the light. Maggie saw it. She growled. It was the first time Ben had heard her make that sound without a stranger in the room. "That's him," Ben said quietly. "That's who was watching us the other night." Dana's jaw tightened. "Then we've got motive, we've got suspicion, and we've got a lead. I'm going to pay a visit to the Fox Hollow site. You'll stay here. If you see him again, you call me." Ben nodded. Before she left, Dana walked back over to Maggie. She didn't reach out, didn't kneel this time. She just looked her in the eye. "You're not alone anymore, girl. We're coming for them." Maggie watched her go. When the door closed behind Dana, she let out a long breath and crawled closer to Ben. She laid her head gently on his foot. The sky above Hope Hollow darkened earlier than usual that evening, clouds swallowing the last light in a thick gray veil. The air was heavy, as if the forest itself knew something was coming. Ben Whitaker sat at the kitchen table with a map of the region spread out before him. Sheriff Dana had marked the suspected routes tied to the illegal kennel, red ink bleeding along old backroads and Forest Service trails. Maggie rested beneath the table, her head between her paws, eyes half closed but far from asleep. Every sound still made her ears twitch. Her pups, Hope and Haven, now a little more stable on their legs, slept in a soft bed near the fire. Ben traced one of the red lines with his finger, stopping just north of Bear Creek, a place he'd avoided since his younger days. It was the kind of land that didn't forget what had happened on it. As his thoughts wandered, the cabin's back door rattled softly. Maggie sat up. Her hackles didn't rise, not yet, but her body stiffened as if something ancient inside her stirred. Ben stood, every nerve alight. He crossed the room in 2 strides, rifle in hand, and eased open the curtain. There, just beyond the faint reach of the porch light, stood a man. He was stocky and broad, with a thick green coat slick from the mist, boots caked in mud. A hood shadowed most of his face, but when he stepped forward, Ben saw it clearly. Deep-set eyes, jaw clenched tight, and a long scar down the left cheek, the same face Maggie had reacted to in the photo Dana brought, Ray Harlan. Ben opened the door slowly, keeping the rifle low but ready. "You're trespassing." Ray smirked. His voice was gravel, like rocks dragged across steel. "Not looking to cause trouble, just came for what's mine." Ben didn't move. "There's nothing here that belongs to you." Ray's eyes flicked toward the shadow inside the cabin. "That dog in there? She's my property. Been looking for her. She ran off with my investment 2 pureblood pups. Not exactly cheap." Ben stepped onto the porch. "That dog nearly froze to death protecting those pups. You don't get to talk about her like she's livestock." Ray's smile widened into something colder. "You have no idea what she's seen, or what she knows." Behind Ben, Maggie had come to the doorway. Her body was still, but the tension in her stance told him she recognized the manat as an owner, but as a captor. Her lip curled back just slightly, enough to show teeth. Ray pointed a thick gloved hand. "See that?" She remembers. "She saw what happened to that girl, Emma. She was there when we moved her. If you think she's just some dumb mutt, think again." Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. "Get off my land," he said, voice steady. Ray didn't move. "This isn't over, Whitaker. You think that leash means you own her? You've made a mistake. That dog is evidence. And people like me, we clean up evidence." At that, Ben raised the rifle not to fire, but to make his point. Ray stepped back, slow and deliberate. "You'll regret this," he said, and turned into the mist, vanishing as if he had never been there. Ben locked the door the moment he stepped back inside. Maggie pressed her head against his leg, not in fear but in understanding. She had remembered him, and she had chosen not to run. That night, Ben called Dana and relayed everything: Ray's words, his threat, and what he revealed about Emma. "We've got him," Dana said. "If what he said is true, Maggie isn't just a witness. She's our lead. I'll push for a warrant in the morning. Stay armed. He won't come back tonight, but he's not done." Ben didn't sleep. He sat in the living room, the pups curled beside Maggie, the rifle within reach, every lamp off. The cabin was dark, but Maggie's eye-soft, amber, alert reflected the glow of the fire like 2 lanterns watching over them all. Rain fell in sheets, not in drops, each gust of wind slamming it against the cabin like fists made of ice. The pines bowed low in the storm, their limbs shivering beneath the weight. Thunder rolled deep in the sky, echoing through the woods like distant cannon fire. The storm had come fast, unseasonal, and wild own of those bitter March tempests that felt like winter refusing to die. Inside the cabin, Ben Whitaker paced slowly, lantern in hand. The power had gone out an hour ago. The fireplace burned low, casting a dull orange circle across the floor, where the pups Hope and Haven curled together in their crate. Maggie lay close by, head up, alert. She had sensed something long before the lights flickered. Her eyes tracked every sound outside. The howl of wind, the groan of the porch wood, the hiss of rain slicing through the gutters. Ben moved to the window and peeled back the edge of the blanket he'd hung over it. Nothing but darkness beyond. But Maggie now, her body tense. "You hear it too," Ben said softly. A flash of lightning lit the yard for a single second, and in that instant, he saw it. A shadow moving along the tree line. Ben dropped the curtain and grabbed the shotgun leaning against the kitchen counter. He checked the chamber by instinct, then moved to the front door, bolting it tighter. Maggie followed, close but silent. A thud hit the side of the cabin, then another. Ben spun toward the back door just as it rattled hard on its hinges. "Stay back," he whispered to Maggie, though he knew she wouldn't listen. Another crash, this time louder, as if someone was trying to break through the old wood paneling near the back shed. Ben moved toward it, crouching low. Maggie moved with him, shoulders low, her growl a soft tremor in the floor. Then glass shattered. A window. The one near the pups. Ben turned, heart racing. A figure had reached in through the broken pane, trying to unlatch the window. Without hesitation, Maggie lunged. Her body moved like lightning, no bark, no warning, just the raw, silent force of instinct. She leapt across the room, launching herself at the window, jaws snapping around the intruder's arm. A howl of pain erupted into the storm. The Man Ray Harlan jerked back, his arm yanked from the frame, the sleeve torn and bleeding. Maggie landed, mud on her coat, rain dripping from the open window frame. Ben rushed to secure the pups, dragging their crate into the pantry, barricading it with an overturned table. But the storm wasn't over. Footsteps pounded onto the porch. Another mantler, gaunt, with a buzzed scalp and a steel flashlight, appeared in the doorway, pushing against the frame. His name was Clint Myers, Ray's old partner in the kennel trade. Clint had a crooked nose and a hunting knife strapped to his thigh. He wasn't just muscle, he enjoyed fear. "Back off," Ben shouted. But before he could raise the shotgun, Maggie lunged again, not to kill, but to shield. She placed herself directly between Ben and the door, teeth bared, eyes burning with something ancient and fearless. Thunder shook the sky. Rain soaked her back, but she stood unmoving. Clint paused, startled. "What the hell is wrong with that mutt?" Ben raised the barrel. "She's not a mutt. She's more human than you'll ever be." He fired unsanod at Clint, but into the ground near his feet. Clint stumbled back, slipping on the wet porch, and vanished into the dark. Ben slammed the door shut and bolted it. Maggie remained by his side, chest heaving, soaked to the bone. The storm began to move east, its fury fading. Ben knelt beside her. "You didn't run," he said. "You didn't even flinch." Maggie leaned against him. He could feel her shaking, not from cold, but from release. She had done what once seemed impossible. She had faced the nightmare, and she had chosen to protect. Later that night, Dana arrived with 2 deputies in tow. The rain had eased to a drizzle. They swept the grounds, found boot prints, blood droplets, and a knife wedged in the mud near the porch. But no sign of Ray or Clint. "They'll come back," Dana said, "but they'll think twice next time." Ben looked down at Maggie, who now rested near the pups, her eyes half closed, but her ears still tuned to every sound. "They won't scare her again," he said. "She's not theirs anymore." Dana gave a quiet nod. She never was. The first light of dawn cast golden streaks through the pine canopy, chasing away the remnants of the storm that had raged through the night. Mist curled above the wet ground like breath from the earth itself. Hope Hollow stirred, groggy but intact. Inside Ben Whitaker's cabin, a fragile calm had returned. The fire had burned low, but warmth lingered in the stone hearth. Maggie lay curled near the pups, her eyes half shut, body still damp but peaceful. Ben sat at the table, the empty coffee mug in front of him forgotten. He hadn't slept, but he didn't feel tired. Not now, not after last night. Maggie had stood her ground. She had saved them all. And yet, Ben knew it wasn't over not until they found Emma. A knock broke the quiet. Ben rose quickly and opened the door. Standing there was Sheriff Dana Collins, face flushed from the cold morning air. Behind her, 2 patrol trucks idled, and a third figure climbed out, a man in his 50s, with a stocky build, dark jacket, and salt and pepper hair. "This is Detective Marshal Keene from the State Task Force," Dana said. "He's been working a broader case tied to animal trafficking and missing children." Keene offered a firm nod. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Mr. Whitaker." Ben stepped aside to let them in. Maggie stood but didn't growl. She watched Keene with the same cautious intelligence that had carried her through so much. He acknowledged her with a nod of respect. "Tell me what you've found," Ben said. Keene dropped a worn folder onto the table. "Last night, while your storm was lighting up the sky, our tech team cracked into Ray Harlan's burner phone records. He's been calling a property registered to a shell corporation out in Millen Ridge about 30 minutes west of here. Surveillance drones picked up a structure surrounded by kennels, but also signs of habitation. A generator, fresh tire tracks, and a makeshift cellar entrance." Dana stepped in. "We think Emma may be there. We're moving now." "I'm coming," Ben said without hesitation. Keene looked at Dana. She gave a short nod. He knows Maggie. She trusts him. And if there's anything in that place she recognizes, she'll lead us. They arrived at the Millen Ridge property just after 8 a.m. The road was barely passable, washed in mud and half choked by brush. A small wooden house sat hunched beneath sagging pines, surrounded by old fencing and the rusted shells of dog cages. The house looked abandoned, but the drone footage hadn't lied. Faint plumes of smoke still rose from the chimney. Maggie stiffened as soon as they exited the vehicle. Her ears twitched, body tensed. She pulled gently at the leash, then stopped, staring at the cellar door that protruded from the back of the cabin like an afterthought. "That's where she wants to go," Ben said. Keene signaled his team. 4 officers flanked the building, silent and swift. Dana approached the cellar with Ben and Maggie close behind. They pried open the lock with a crowbar. The air that spilled out was stale, sour. Maggie didn't hesitate, stepped forward first, descending the stairs into the gloom. Ben followed close, flashlight in hand. The basement was small, concrete-walled, and cluttered. In the far corner, beneath a ratty blanket, lay a child curled into herself, thin arms wrapped around shaking knees. Maggie stopped 2 feet away and let out a single soft bark. The girl stirred. Ben rushed forward. "Emma?" he said gently. The girl lifted her head. Her face was pale and dirty, red hair tangled and matted, but her eyes were unmistakable, wide and blue, and when she saw Maggie, they lit up. "She was there," Emma whispered. "Dog," she barked. "I heard her." Ben's throat tightened. He scooped her up gently. "You're safe now, sweetheart. We're getting you out." Above ground, medical staff rushed to meet them as Ben carried Emma out of the darkness. Maggie followed, standing protectively beside the gurney as paramedics examined the girl. "She's stable," one medic said. "Dehydrated but alert." Emma reached for Maggie's fur as they wheeled her away. "She saved me." That evening, the town of Hope Hollow gathered quietly near the fire station. It wasn't a formal celebration, just warm food, soft music, and a few words shared beneath the glow of hanging lanterns. Emma's parents, Lindsay and Mark Reynolds, held her close, tears never far from their eyes. She hadn't let go of Maggie's leash all day. Reporters had arrived, But Ben kept to the edges, leaning against the firewood pile outside. He didn't need recognition. Not tonight. Inside the cabin that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and wet fur, Maggie now slept with her pups, their little bellies rising and falling in rhythm with hers. Dana approached quietly, a cup of cider in her hands. "We couldn't have done it without her," she said. "She's more than a witness," Ben replied. "She's family." Spring arrived softly that year in Hope Hollow, like someone knocking gently at a long-closed door. The snow had melted into the soil, coaxing out green shoots that curled between old roots and porch steps. Birds returned, hesitantly at first, as if unsure the silence was truly over. Inside the weathered log cabin tucked beneath the pines, warmth no longer came just from the fire. Ben Whitaker stood at the kitchen counter, his sleeves rolled up, a tea towel slung over one shoulder. A pot simmered on the stove beef stew, thick and rich, the kind his grandmother used to make on cold days. He paused, wiping his hands on the towel, and glanced over his shoulder. Maggie lay on a thick, folded quilt in the corner near the hearth. Her coat was clean now, fuller, the glossy gold of a Labrador finally returning. Her eyes, once dim with pain, followed him with quiet trust. Beside her, the two pups tumbled across the rug. They were almost 10 weeks old, now bold, soft-bellied, and full of mischief. One barked at the flickering firelight, the other pounced on his tail. Ben grinned. "Hope," he called softly. The pup turned toward him, ears perked. "Haven," he added, pointing toward the other. "Leave your sister alone." The pups tilted their heads in unison, then tackled each other again. He shook his head and chuckled, setting the pot to simmer. Across the room, the front door creaked open. Sarah Green stepped inside, brushing snowmelt from her long coat. Her tall, lean frame and streaked gray braid gave her the look of someone who had seen more than most and survived it with grace. She carried a canvas bag under one arm. "Got those flea collars and some heartworm meds from Dr. Rowan," she said, dropping the bag on the table. "Also brought peanut butter biscuits. Vet approved." Ben smiled. "You spoil them." Sarah shrugged. "Every good home needs a dog. You just ended up with 3. He poured her a cup of coffee without asking, and she accepted it with a grateful nod. They sat at the table, the pups playing at their feet, Maggie dozing with one eye open. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked. Ben didn't hesitate. "I was sure the moment she stood between me and that door in the rain." Sarah watched the fire crackle. "Earned this. So have you." A knock sounded at the door, followed by the unmistakable voice of Sheriff Dana Collins. "Permission to enter?" "Always," Ben called. Dana stepped inside, dressed in plain jeans and a jacket for once, no badge visible. She looked tired but lighter, as if some hidden burden had been lifted. "Emma sent this," she said, handing Ben a small drawing folded twice. "Said she wanted Maggie to have it." Ben unfolded it slowly. The crayon lines were simple. A big dog, 2 puppies, and a little girl standing beside them. Above their heads, a sun and a cabin. Across the top, in careful child handwriting, "Thank you for finding me. Love, Emma." Maggie sniffed the paper and let out a low, contented sigh. Dana smiled. "We caught Ray Harlan 2 counties over. He won't see sunlight for a long time. Clint, too." Ben nodded. "Justice has a long tail." He stood and walked to the fireplace, sliding the drawing into a small wooden frame, then setting it on the mantel. "Fits in just right," he said. As evening fell, the cabin filled with soft lamplight and the scent of stew. Sarah stayed for dinner. Dana, too. They shared quiet conversation, laughter, the occasional memory heavy with meaning. Outside, the wind moved through the trees not as a warning, but like a lullaby. After the meal, Ben settled on the floor, the pups curled into his lap. Maggie stretched beside him, her head resting on his knee, the room dimmed to flickering gold and shadow. "I didn't know I was missing this," Ben said quietly. Dana glanced up from her chair. "Family?" Ben nodded. "Purpose." Sarah raised her mug in silent agreement. Maggie shifted and nuzzled closer. No words were needed after that. Sometimes, healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the quiet loyalty of a dog who once had every reason not to trust. It comes in the warmth of a fire after the coldest storm. And sometimes, it comes in the soft thump of two little paws chasing shadows across a cabin floor. Maggie never asked to be a hero. She didn't speak a word, but her silence saved lives. Her courage broke chains. Hope and Haven were born into a world that wanted to discard them. Yet here they are, chasing butterflies instead of nightmares. Ben wasn't looking for family. He just opened the door, and in walked something he never knew he was missing. A reason to love again. And maybe that's the truth we all need to remember. That home is not a place. It's a feeling. It's a heartbeat at your feet. A name whispered with gratitude. A quiet promise that says, "You're safe now, and you're never going back." So if this story moved something inside you, don't just let it end here. Open your door. Open your heart. Because somewhere out there, another Maggie is waiting.